consensus among experts that the extreme weather patterns seen in KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape will become commonplace due to climate change. The World Economic Global Risk Report 2022, released last week, flagged climate action failure as the #1 long-term threat over the next decade. While climate change is, of course, already manifesting rapidly in the forms of droughts, fires, floods, resource scarcity, and the loss of species. We're joined now by gift of the Givers Geologist, Dr. Gideon Groenewa. Dr. Groenewa, good evening to you. Thanks for your time. Of course, there are those who will seek to continue denying that our climate is getting warmer and that this is a direct impact of that. As a geologist, let's talk about some of the patterns that we've seen in a country like South Africa just over the last 5 years that indicate this.
Yes, I think for the sake of your viewers, just go a little bit back in time. Let's go, say, 10 million years back in time. It sounds very long for human beings, but cycles of change in the climate happens all the time. So we have these global warming events and then cooling events, but we are definitely in a global warming event at the moment. But what one must realize is those of us who are old enough to remember 1988 when the Moina, the big cyclone that hit KwaZulu-Natal in 1988, we had exactly the same situation as now, and it's very much on time. These cycles are about 55 years long, and we are on time to have this flood event coming in after the drought. The drought was a cyclic event, and we're back in the wet cycle now. These are caused by, there's two little, if we call it little, a boy and a girl in the Pacific Ocean called La Nina is the one that's now causing the wetness. We have El Nino, the little boy that caused the drought. And so this is a very normal situation within our climate in South Africa. We see that all over the country in the rocks that we have these events. Whether this is a very big change in climate, that will have to be seen in the next 100 years. But I think we are looking at a very normal change where the icy cold air from the south is moving in, some hot air from the north. These two meet around KwaZulu-Natal, and that causes these extreme floods, which we're going to see due to La Nina. We're going to see this summer in the summer rainfall region, and people will have to be very, very careful of this event. It's going to be a very wet year, and people must be extremely careful and know that this is going to happen this year. It's a once-off year of extreme flooding for South Africa.
Dr. Groenewa, let's talk then around the predictability concerning such events. Listening to you speak just over the last minute or so, it sounds like you saw this coming, but some of us didn't. Is it predictable? Should officials be well prepared for it?
Yes, it is predictable in the fact that it's coming. It's just that nobody can tell when. It's the when that is the big issue here. So we predicted in 2013 within Gift of the Givers that we're going to see some severe droughts. And then in 2018 we predicted that the drought will be ended with massive flooding. So yes, this was expected to happen. The timing was impossible. We couldn't tell the people a week ago that it's going to flood in KwaZulu-Natal. What I can tell you, if I look at the long-term predictions in the models, then tomorrow evening there will probably be a little bit of a cyclonic activity north of Durban that's going to cause severe flooding there in about 100 square kilometers. But then on the 24th of January, I can see in the models predicted in the channel of the Mozambique Channel, a very big cyclone developing. Now that can cause severe flooding in the northern part of KwaZulu-Natal. And I think people should be aware that although these things we can't predict if they're coming, but we can, at least in the models, we can say, be careful, there's one coming.
Let's talk about what it is that can be put in place, and as far as the responses that are triggered when such adverse weather events take place.
I think, first of all the people in South Africa, every single person must know that it is highly unlikely that people born in the 70s and 80s, when they were 10 or 12 years old, will be able to remember how high the water in the rivers was or were in 1988. You have to ask your grandparents, where were the water in 1988? They will then tell you where the rivers went to. I, for instance, have been to Ladysmith, where the water going through the gap at the town, the water rose 52 meters to get through the gap on the other side of the town. So I knew that in a flood event like this, the Klip River can't get through the gap, so it backs up. And that is one of the main issues for me as a geologist, is that these things that happened in the past, the same is going to happen in Golden Gate. The same is going to happen along the Orange River. That is definitely a given. And I think people should ask the old people, where were the big flood waters, and then make sure that you stay clear of those areas, especially during nighttime when you have rainfall but you don't know how much is falling. People must remember, if 100 millimeters of rain falls in 5 hours, then over 100 square kilometers, all that mass of water must get down a river. And that causes the rivers to flood its banks, and people must be careful of low-lying areas for the whole of the summer until May. And then after May, my prediction is that we might see some severe snowstorms in the high-lying areas, especially Ladysmith, Harrismith area might see very severe snowstorms.
Dr. Groenewa, we're talking about Ladysmith. The visuals coming out of there today is of a CBD district that has been partially submerged underwater, and that water is absolutely still. It is not flowing anywhere. What are the solutions to a problem like that? Because the kind of infrastructure that has been built there certainly does not accommodate for this idea of nature almost resetting itself and rivers being as full as they were about 30-odd years ago.
Exactly. Yeah, I think being a geologist and working with dinosaurs and working with fossils, I've been collecting, dead animals from the Ladysmith area for many years of my life. And I can tell you that they built a water structure, a control structure out of town to try and keep the Klip River from not flooding the town. But with this kind of rainfall that we're going to expect this year, those structures are going to be filled very quickly, and then the normal nature will just take its course. The big reason for the flooding, and it seems like that's a dam now where the town is, there's a very small gap where the Klip River must go through a very high mountain range there. And I think that gap can't handle the water going through, so the water needs time to get through, and that's causing this sort of a damming effect that we see in town at the moment.
Does that mean that the residents are likely to clean up now, only to find themselves in a similar situation in a couple of months?
Well, probably a couple of weeks. The problem is that the underground or the soil is now soaked with water. There's nowhere water can seep away anywhere. So all the water that falls in the reaches of the Klip River along the escarpment to Harrismith must now go through the gap at Ladysmith. And I think the most important thing for the engineering department and the people in Ladysmith is to look at the 200-year flood line for the town. They must speak to the old people, what happened in 1988, see where the water levels were, and then expect that to be even higher. Because remember, the drought that we experienced in 2018 to 2020 was deeper than the drought before the flood of 1988. So I expect as a geologist that this wetness is going to be even higher than what we experienced in 1988.
Let's talk about general infrastructure that has been put in place to try and deal with, events of this nature. Of course, we have the general stormwater drainage systems. Those seem to be completely overwhelmed right now. Do we need to be rethinking part of the infrastructure in this country to accommodate for the kind of weather we're experiencing? Although you do say that, it's not necessarily surprising that we're getting this weather.
No, I think the engineers, laying out the town, developing the town, should have looked at the historic levels of the river, of the Klip River, and just didn't, rather not develop in these areas where the water will be every 55 years, or the other option is to build in that area and expect every 55 years that you're going to have about 2 or 3 years of flooding and then live through the next 50 years with no flooding. So it's either that, or you must plan your town not to develop into areas where historically the place floods, because these floods will return just as the droughts are going to return. So I expect in about 7 to 11 years from now, we will be back in a drought. So unfortunately, these are written in the rocks. Even the dinosaurs knew that these cycles are reality.
Dr. Groenewa, let's take a broader look at other provinces. The Eastern Cape, of course, has just barely come out of its own bout of inclement weather. We saw part of it affect areas of the Northern Cape as well. What do things look like for some of these provinces going into the next couple of weeks?
Okay, let's just quickly have a look again at the climate patterns that we see. Researchers in Australia has now confirmed there's a very high possibility that the southeastern part of South Africa, that is then from Quebec to East London to Mthatha, will experience a drier period than normal over the summer season. So these extreme flooding events and these tornadoes and storms are actually part of the dry cycle still, and they will be now and then. So people must know that they're still in trouble with water provision in terms of the drought. In terms of the La Nina effect in the summer rainfall north of Queenstown going up to Polokwane and those places will have extreme rainfall. So there's no problem with droughts there. But what I see is the eastern flow of air coming into South Africa. What I see now is there are cyclones that's developing on the eastern side of Madagascar that's coming further south than normal. So I expect some cyclones that will eventually hit Quebec, like in 1969. The Gamtus River flooded its banks. In 1970, Port Elizabeth was flooded. 71, East London, and in 72, Durban. So these are very normal that we would expect cyclones to come south now. We have the big one coming on the 24th, which is very far north, but I expect they're going to start turning south. And that was also confirmed by a geologist, doctor at Wits University, who published that there are evidence along the Transkei coast that we actually had extreme cyclone effects once every, say about 55 to 70 years. And we are exactly on time for those things to happen now.
How do we get ourselves ready?
It is unfortunate that you will never know. The best is don't build in the low-lying areas. If you look at the villages in the your traditional South Africa, the villages are all on the hills. Nobody builds next to rivers in the traditional way. None of these villages are they're all on the high hills. People walk down to the rivers, to the spring sites to fetch water and walk back up the mountain. They know that you don't build close to these rivers and flaylands. That is the first. And the second thing is, if the buildings are there now, people will have to understand that your outflow system for your flood waters, your bulk water that enters a town, if the town is already on the flood river level, if the river is then over its banks, the pipes are also flooded. So then the water has got nowhere else to go than to dam back and go through a house.
Let me thank you so much for that insightful conversation, Dr. Gideon Groenewa. He is the geologist for Gift of the Givers.